Welcome to Interview with a CEO, a chance to delve beneath the title and find out what makes the movers and shakers of the car industry tick. Today we're at Mazda Australia HQ to meet with the man responsible for the brand, Managing Director, Martin Benders. How are you doing, Martin? Thanks for joining us today.
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Would you call yourself a car guy?
I can remember as a little kid riding around in the back seat of my parents' car and being able to identify every model and every variant of cars that I saw on the road. So maybe that makes me a car guy. I certainly have an interest in cars. My first new car that I ever bought, the only new car I ever bought, was a Mazda. But I'm not a petrol head to the extent that, I'm a slavish follower of motorsport.
What was the Mazda that you owned?
A Capella.
Capella, wow. And do you think it's important that car company bosses like yourself do have that passion for the automotive industry?
Yeah, I think it does give you an insight, from time to time, and we have had interactions with other brands, and you talk to people who just look at it as a product that, as if it was a tube of toothpaste or something, and you think these guys, they really don't approach it from the same way. And cars are an emotional sort of thing in people's lives, mainly because of the amount of money they have to invest in them. So yeah, I think it helps if you've got a bit of passion for the product.
And what's your background, Martin? Have you always been in the car business?
No, I actually started as a finance guy, and we've had 3 managing directors in Mazda Australia, all finance guys. Spent about 10 years before Mazda working in various industries like food and packaging and stuff like that. I did get offered a job with the Ford graduate program when I left uni, but I'd already taken another role. It took me about 20 years before I finally ended up back in Ford by default through the Mazda connection.
And so how long have you actually been working for Mazda for now?
A long time, 30 years this year.
Wow, that's quite an anniversary. Have you always been based in Australia with Mazda, or have you spent time in other regions?
Well, I started with Mazda in Brisbane because they were the distributor up there. But within 12 months, Mazda Australia was formed because the distributor said it's too hard because the currency got very volatile. So we eventually moved head office down to Melbourne, and I sort of followed a couple of years later. Then in 2007, I got the opportunity to become the head of the global marketing division in Japan, which was a big honour. Spent 3 years there, and then 3 years VP of sales for Mazda in Europe before coming back here.
And whereabouts were you based in Europe doing that?
In Cologne.
In Cologne?
So the head office is in Germany. They have a big operation in Brussels, in Antwerp as well, in Belgium. But all their administration. So it's like a central office running all the different countries in Europe. So
having seen a perspective from Japan and Europe and Australia, what is it that actually makes the Australian market unique?
I've had a time to think about it because people often say, what's an Australian car consumer like? And the way I've personified it is Australian car buyers like European design and European quality, but they prefer American powertrains because of, I think, the distances they have to drive sometimes. That sort of personifies the Australian consumer. I guess one of the differences here is that the Japanese have done quite well, the Japanese brands, because the cars they make haven't had to compete head-on with the locals. So in Europe, they would have to compete with the Volkswagens and the French brands and so forth directly. In the US, the big brands make those size cars as well. So you have to compete with the local manufacturers. So they're a different environment. It's a bit harder to get a foothold, but I think they've had a long, consistent place in the Australian market, and so it reflects the Japanese brands being a bit more prominent here than maybe the other markets.
And of all the Japanese brands that are prominent, Mazda's, behind only Toyota is the most prominent, and it's the most popular brand that doesn't actually make cars here at all. You therefore must face some particularly unique challenges within Mazda, I would imagine. I mean, this is one of the biggest regions anywhere in the globe.
Well, we've had a few unique advantages with Mazda here. I mean, the Mazda product, I think, follows a European sort of styling ethic, if you like, and a technology ethic, which I think has given them a uniqueness amongst the Japanese brands. So that's been good from our perspective. From a local operational perspective, as I said earlier, there's only been 3 managing directors. They've all been Australian. They've all developed internally. We've sort of run the company from our own perspective, and I think with the distractions of the bubble economy in the 90s and the Ford involvement with Mazda, we were able to fly under the radar for a while to establish the business here. And once we established that success, success does breed an ability to give you a seat at the table in Japan and some confidence and trust from them. And that's the status we're in at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's not something that every car maker's Australian arm enjoys. You said before that there's only been 3 MDs and they've all been Australian, and that's not something that's often the case. A lot of car companies
very much so.
bring their MDs or CEOs from overseas. It's almost like a training ground. But what benefits does being an Australian with an intimate knowledge of the market give you?
It gives you a way to talk to the dealers and build trust with the dealers. I mean, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that we have a strong partnership with our dealer network. And because of our success in doing that, we've also got a strong partnership with Mazda in Japan. If you've got that trust through the pipeline, it gives you the ability to do things consistently over time. And one of the things that we've done with our dealers is we grew our volume and our share in this market without adding or over-dealerising. So the dealers have sort of benefited as well. And so they're a strong network, they're a stable network. We have that trust between one another.
So is the flip side of your success perhaps that you have maybe an extra amount of pressure on you from Japanese headquarters compared to some of your contemporaries in other markets maybe?
Ooh, I don't know whether we have more pressure than our contemporaries because they have a lot more work to do. We do stand out amongst the Mazda markets, the major Mazda markets, as one of the more successful ones. The pressure that it puts on us is, one, they want us to keep growing and keep performing because we do set a benchmark in the Mazda world. And we do get held up quite often as a best practice market for Mazda. So we do get a lot of visits. I think there's a few people floating around here at the moment from South Africa and Thailand doing a bit of work with us. I think we're getting the Canadians and the Russians coming over shortly. We've had the Vikings and the Germans here. So we have a lot of people coming here to sort of understand what we do. I guess the trick is that, you know, we're not an overnight success. We didn't sort of wake up one morning and say, this is how we're going to be. We've evolved things and we've improved things over time. And when you sort of explain that as a business model, it's very easy to write down. So they start implementing those things, and then the next 6 months later, they say, well, it's not working yet. It takes a long time to build up that trust, that consistency, that continuation to actually grow the business. It's not something that you can do overnight.
You've got to have a bit of patience.
Patience. I mean, we're blessed with a product cycle that's been very strong, and the current cycle, I think, would be the best ever. So that does help, but I think it helps more with us because we've got the business basics right.
Well, one of the biggest decisions to come out, at least publicly, from Mazda Australia recently is the massive price cut on the MX-5. It's going to be 50% cheaper at base level than the outgoing car. That's almost the same price as the original was in 1989. Do you think it can make as big an impact on the market as the NA did, which we've got right behind us?
Now, I remember taking you on a drive where you actually got to drive NA, NB and C back to back.
That was a highlight.
That was a highlight, and you sort of said, I get it now, what this culture of MX-5 is all about. And as MX-5 has aged, since up to the NC model, it got more sophisticated and more advanced, but it sort of lost a little bit of its origin, that lightweight, pure fun sports car. And it got a bit more expensive. So I think what Mazda Corporation wanted to do was bring it back to its roots, if you like. Now, if I go back to the original NA, we had a camel hump demographic profile. We had a lot of young people driving it, and then a lot of people were living their youth in post-children, if you like, pre-retirement or even in retirement. As the model aged, it got more comfortable, so that kept the older people in, but the younger people sort of didn't go with the price. So I guess what we can do now is, with the new model, we now have 2 engine options. We have a cheaper entry variant. So we're looking to sort of reawaken the excitement of open-top motoring and real interaction with the car to that younger generation.
Was it the success of the Toyota 86 and its sub 30k price that really made you guys sit up and say, hey, we probably do need to cut that price back?
Yes and no. I mean, they certainly did reset that bar, if you like, but I don't know if you obviously do read industry comments, and especially out of the US. Young people are not interested in cars anymore, and they don't want to buy cars. I think 86 proved that was rubbish. If the right car comes out, they'll get involved with it. MX-5 does have something unique, that open-top motoring, that feel of speed and excitement because you're low on the ground and you've got nothing around your head. I think that's something that is not common these days, and I think it's a good time to be out there and doing it again.
So you don't subscribe to the theory that young people aren't interested in cars like they used to be?
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, if I go into certain environments where there are those people around, they want to talk to you about cars as much as my generation does.
The boss of one of your biggest rivals from Toyota recently said he thought his customers were sick of having to haggle with the dealers. He's ordered the salespeople to have a set price and to make it a bit more, I guess, simple and
Yeah, I did read that.
fuss-free.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys might apply as well? Or?
No, look, no matter which way you look at it, a lot of people have a trade-in, so there's always a bit of understanding about what that car is worth. Certainly there's more information available online for the customer to work that out. So that's where the trust factor does come in, because I don't think it's going to happen anymore that a customer walks in, has looked up online what their car's worth, and then suddenly the dealer undercuts that by multiple thousands of dollars. I don't think the opportunity is there anymore. So we do need to be aware of what's available, what information's there. But people still realise that there's a whole of life cost, there's a transaction cost, there's a changeover cost, and that those things are, it's not possible to sort of make them a one size fits all, because not every customer is the same. Either the way they're buying the car, there's finance involved, novated leases. So I think it's a bit simplistic to say that. Our research showed that customers expect some sort of negotiation in the process. They're not afraid of that. What worries them is if they're getting stuffed around or they lose that trust factor, and then that's where it falls over.
As of recently, you were appointed the Treasurer of the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, which is the Australian auto industry's peak body. What does that entail?
Oh, sounds a bit more upmarket than it really is.
It does sound very prestigious.
Very prestigious, exactly. No, look, the FCAI has a reasonable sized budget, in the numbers of millions of dollars, which comes from subscriptions from the manufacturers, but also from selling market data and so forth. And so they have a responsibility to the board in terms of how they spend that money, the staffing, and what sort of research or projects they undertake. There's a budget, there's a monitoring of their expenditure and preparing the following year budget. So it's really getting involved with that. But there are clerical people involved at FCAI that do most of the number crunching. It's just really looking over the figures, making sure they make sense and so forth.
I've heard some say that perhaps with all the battles that it chooses to fight, the FCAI is maybe a little bit too aligned with the three local car makers, potentially at the expense of the importer brands, of which you guys are the biggest. Is that something that you think has some merit? Do you agree with that? And if so, how is the FCAI trying to change that direction?
Look, certainly historically that's where they started, that's where their life started, and there were more manufacturers going back enough years. That has been changing gradually as the local manufacturers have lost a bit of share. And there is a vibrant importers group within the FCAI that operates in parallel and discusses the issues that affect the whole industry. Certainly for the next couple of years, before the Fords and Holdens of this world depart from the local manufacturing, there are still a number of issues that involve government interaction that they will need to deal with, and the FCAI has the expertise for that. But going forward, they are working on what their model will be going forward, and there are plenty of issues: parallel imports, CO2 regulation, safety. There's plenty of genuine parts, how people get their cars repaired under accident or even for repair issues. So there are plenty of issues that we need to be monitoring and having a single voice on, I think.
Assistant Minister Jamie Briggs has been quite vocal about he's in favour of opening up the importation of new or near new cars and allowing people to do that themselves rather than through organisations like yours. What are the pitfalls and risks, as far as you see it, of that?
Well, I can understand, the rationale, because there is some consumer evidence that people are buying more things online and parallel importing their own things. But by and large, those things tend to be low value, low impact type items like clothing, computers, what have you. When it comes to cars, we're talking about a bigger value item that has more risk involved. Now, we're a right-hand drive market. There's only 2 right-hand drive markets that would have the same standard in terms of safety and emissions, etc., which is the UK and Japan. So really they're the only two markets you could import from. Both those markets have significant differences in terms of they're not a hot climate market, so cars will have some differences in relation to that. They have different radio frequency operating things for Navi, for radios, for what have you. Also require adjustment. So those things are not going to be able to be fixed by individuals. Now, the other thing that happens is we operate under the ACL, the Australian Consumer Legislation, which puts a big onus on us to look after customers well into the future. And if you bring in your car as a self-importer, if you like, a private importer, you lose a lot of that protection because we can't necessarily fix the car if it's not a car we import, or if it has features that we can't protect, or if it's not even a model we import. So there are a fair number of consumer risks. And I guess the crucial one is safety. Safety recalls. There's one floating around at the moment. We only know the cars that we import. If somebody brings in their own car, we don't know it's here. So we won't be talking to that customer unless somehow it comes to our notice. So there's a risk that that car sort of travels on with a safety defect that won't get fixed. So, there are big issues, and it's not like bringing in something that doesn't get on the road and doesn't have people riding around in it.
Parallel imports also have the potential to take sales from the local car makers or car distributors like you. So isn't there a bit of a vested interest in car company managing directors opposing the opening of this legislation? Look,
there's always been enthusiasts importing their own cars. There will be some models, exotic sports cars, even, last of run RX-7s and RX-8s, that still came out in Japan after we stopped importing, where people say, yeah, I want one of those. Ability to do that still exists. This is really about the government extending it and sort of encouraging people to go and buy their own cars. So once you sort out being able to import a car, making sure that you're actually saving money, and there's always this idea that, oh, well, look, I'll save 10 grand or 20 grand or whatever it is, but they forget to look at the tail end when they've got this imported car and there's nobody wants to buy it in Australia. Suddenly they lose 10 grand at the other end or even more. So whole of life is an issue, as another risk issue. So we know people want to buy particular cars. It may be annoying to us if a car gets launched in Japan before it gets launched here and suddenly one of those arrives here, but in reality, no, I don't think so. We really look at it from the consumer perspective. The risk goes to them. We take the risk now with all the cars we import. It's very hard for us to take the risk on any cars they bring in themselves because we don't know what it is. We don't know where they got it from. We don't know. We may not even be able to service it. If you take a Euro Stage 6 car, it has a lot more onboard diagnostics and computer interaction than Euro Stage 4 or 5 that's in Australia. So even if we plugged our system in, it wouldn't speak to the Euro Stage 6 cars. So, they're all things that are just going to make the owner experience suboptimal. And while we don't have to support those cars under ACCC regulation or comments, people are still going to see the Mazda badge on it, so we don't like it from that perspective either.
Okay, crystal ball time now. Where do you think the industry is going to be in 10 or 20 years' time? What are some of the hallmarks that we'll see then that we don't see now?
Yeah, I wish I had a perfect crystal ball, Mike. Look, there's a lot of hype around at the moment, hype about connected cars, hype about autonomous driving cars, electric cars, those sort of things. But I read a report just today, actually, by Goldman Sachs, which looked at mega trends in the auto industry. And I think they're a bit more buttoned down and a bit more calm about what's going on. So certainly powertrain development, the move into electrics, whether they be hybrids or plug-in hybrids or pure electric. Their comment was that most of that is driven by legislation, like the zero-emission tailpipe emissions in California or the 198 grams that's coming into Europe. So they're driven by regulation, but not by customer demand. So their forecast was that at least for the next 10 years, at least 75% of the industry would still be driven by petrol and gasoline engines in some form or another. And that's where Mazda is fighting, making those engines super efficient. The connected car, the autonomous car, they sort of speculated that most of the benefit of that sort of technology is going to be in things like trains and certain buses and controlled environments rather than out in the general public. No recognition that the way people drive cars and own cars is being fixed by those autonomous driving models, is being changed or challenged. One thing that they did comment on was that while powertrains are getting more efficient, the weight of cars hasn't really come down an awful lot, so lightweight technology, and that's another area that Mazda's very interested in, so some sort of technology to reduce the weight of cars to contribute to fuel efficiency will come in. And I think connected cars in the sense of where we could conceivably monitor the car and the way it's used and service according to that, rather than you come in every 6 months or you come in whatever. I mean, at the moment we've done that on a kilometre basis now. We sort of say, come in when you do 10,000 kilometres, don't come in on 6 months. So, getting it more in line with the way people drive their car. So I think we can do that more with technology. So there are ways still to improve the experience, the way the cars can interact with people. But the fundamental freedom and flexibility of owning your own car, getting into it when you want to, getting from A to B when you want to, and enjoying the experience has still not been replaced by anything that's happened. And where something like Tesla happens, where they have an engaging or enticing electric vehicle package, the existing manufacturers can move into there quite quickly.
What about in 2025? Will we see Mazda as Australia's top-selling car brand?
Look, I don't think so. I think the number one brand at the moment is Toyota. They have many, many more models than we do. They sell to a lot more buyer segments than we're interested in dealing with. So they will always have that ability to sell more than us. But we're quite happy where we are at the moment. We're a solid number 2 for the first 5 months of the year. We're near the top in private buyers, which are the people that we still focus on. We do have an interest in talking to buyers that have a choice of their car but may buy it through their companies in some way or other. So we're looking at that as an extension of our target buyer, if you like. So I think we'll sort of sit where we are, and it'll be a matter of whether we can find a couple more niches with product.
Do you actually care about rankings and pecking orders? Does it matter if you're second or third or fourth or wherever it stands?
Look, being second in the marketplace does give you some advantages and some abilities, but no, we want to stay true to who our buyers are, and we want to stay true to what our product is. And I think that's one of the advantages that Mazda has had. In the last 15 years, we have developed our products along a consistent trajectory, where style is important, where the way the car drives is important, and where the experience that a customer has with the product is important. And a lot of car brands sort of try and jump around to what's hot, and we've sort of stayed on a fairly consistent path, which I think helps build that trust with the consumer as well. They understand who you are.
And I'd be remiss not to ask this one for all our enthusiasts out there. When are we going to see another Mazda Rotary?
Look, the Rotary is exceptionally important to Mazda. I think it drives a lot of the way that Mazda thinks. The fact that we signed on to Rotary as early as the 1960s, and basically we're the only company to commercialise it, it really does drive a lot of the way that Mazda thinks. I think MX-5 would never have happened unless Mazda had that sort of thinking process. I think in 2020, it's Mazda's 100th anniversary of making cars, and I think there's a significant anniversary on the horizon for the Rotary as well, so I'd like to think that Mazda's working on something in that respect. Maybe a skunk works in the background somewhere.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
It would go well in Australia, no doubt.
It would.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Martin.
Thanks,
really
Mike.
Appreciate it.
It was enjoyable. Thank you very much.
So there you have it, an insight into one of the movers and shakers of the Australian car industry. Let us know what you thought, what you liked, what you didn't, and what you'd like to see from the next edition. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube, follow us on Facebook or on Twitter.